Welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and beside me is Maya Clarity. Tonight we are covering a war that is metastasizing far beyond Gaza. We're talking about strikes on Gulf aluminum smelters, the Strait of Hormuz shutting down, Europe paralyzed between conscience and cowardice, and the Vatican itself being locked out of one of Christianity's holiest sites. This is not a collection of random headlines. This is a pattern. And by the end of tonight, you're going to see exactly how these pieces fit together.
Let's start in Jerusalem, Alex, because what happened this Palm Sunday is something that should shock every person of faith on this planet. Israeli authorities physically blocked senior Catholic leaders from entering the Church of the Holy Sepulchre for Palm Sunday, Massachusetts. This is the site where Christians believe Jesus was crucified, buried, and resurrected. We're not talking about some disputed checkpoint in the West Bank. This is the single most sacred site in all of Christendom, and Israel decided that Catholic leadership was not welcome there.
And let's be specific about who was blocked. These weren't random tourists. These were top Catholic officials, the very people responsible for administering religious rites at a church that has stood for over 1600 years. Middle East. I broke this story, and the implications are staggering. Israel is now asserting security authority over Christian worship inside Jerusalem's Old City in a way that directly interferes with religious freedom. Ask yourself, when was the last time you heard about a government physically preventing church leaders from conducting Palm Sunday services?
Never. And that's the point. What Israel is signaling here is total dominion, not just over Palestinian land, not just over Muslim holy sites like Al-Aqsa, but now over Christian sacred spaces too. This is a government that receives billions in American taxpayer dollars, largely justified by the claim that Israel is a democratic state that protects religious pluralism. Palm Sunday 2026 just shattered that narrative completely. The Vatican has been notably restrained in its criticism of Israel throughout the Gaza campaign, and this is how they're repaid.
The silence from Washington on this is deafening. The United States, which positions itself as the global defender of religious liberty, has said nothing. Imagine for 1 second if Iran blocked Catholic bishops from a church. Imagine if China did it. It would be wall-to-wall coverage on every American network for a week. But Israel does it, and the story barely registers. That tells you everything about who controls the narrative and who gets a permanent pass on behavior that would be condemned anywhere else on earth.
And this connects directly to our fifth story tonight, Alex, the broader war on humanity that Al Jazeera is documenting. Their analysis is blunt. The lawlessness and brutality of the U.S.-Israeli genocide in Gaza have now spread to other parts of the world. That word, genocide, is not hyperbole anymore. The International Court of Justice has ruled on plausible genocide. Multiple UN rapporteurs have used that term. What we're witnessing is not a conflict. It is a campaign of elimination that has now metastasized into a regional war.
Let's talk about that metastasis, because the Iran situation has escalated dramatically. Iranian forces struck Aluminium Bahrain, one of the largest aluminum smelters on the planet, and Emirates Global Aluminium in the UAE. 2 workers at the Bahrain facility were injured. The UAE site sustained what's being called significant damage. These are not military targets. These are industrial facilities that supply aluminum to global manufacturing chains. The Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of the world's oil passes, is now effectively closed.
Think about what that means for the global economy. Gulf aluminum producers account for a massive share of the world's supply. When you strike those facilities and simultaneously close Hormuz, you're not just hitting 2 countries, you're sending shockwaves through every supply chain that depends on Middle Eastern energy and raw materials. Aluminum is in everything: aircraft, electronics, construction, automotive manufacturing. The South China Morning Post reported that most Gulf aluminum producers are now reassessing operations. This is economic warfare on a global scale.
And here's what mainstream media won't connect for you: why is Iran striking Bahrain and the UAE? Because both countries have enabled the U.S. military posture that made strikes on Iran possible. Bahrain hosts the U.S. Fifth Fleet. The UAE has deep defense cooperation agreements with Washington. Iran sees these nations not as neutral neighbors but as forward operating platforms for American power projection. The aluminum strikes are Iran saying, if you let America use your territory to wage war on us, your infrastructure is not safe.
Which brings us to Europe's crisis, and this is where the cowardice becomes almost unbearable. The South China Morning Post published an extraordinary analysis arguing that Europe's response to the Iran war risks becoming its darkest hour. Public opinion across Europe overwhelmingly opposes this conflict. Europeans see it for what it is, a war that circumvents the core principles of international law. But European governments are paralyzed because they are completely dependent on the United States for energy and security.
Let's unpack that dependency, because it's the key to understanding why Europe won't act. After the Russia-Ukraine conflict disrupted European energy supplies, the continent pivoted hard toward American liquefied natural gas. The US is now Europe's primary energy supplier. That gives Washington enormous leverage. If Europe takes a definitive anti-war stance, they risk alienating Donald Trump, and Trump has already demonstrated he's willing to use economic coercion against allies. Europe is caught between its stated values and its material dependency. And right now, dependency is winning.
This is the trap that American foreign policy has been building for decades. You make allies dependent on your energy, your military umbrella, your financial systems, and then when you do something unconscionable, those allies can't afford to object. The European Union, which lectures the world about human rights and international law, is sitting on its hands while civilians are being slaughtered and a regional war spirals out of control. The hypocrisy is not subtle. It's structural. It's baked into the transatlantic relationship.
And the consequences of European silence are concrete. Without European opposition, there is no meaningful diplomatic counterweight to US-Israeli escalation. The UN Security Council is deadlocked because America vetoes everything. The International Criminal Court issues warrants that are ignored. The ICJ makes rulings that are treated as suggestions. Every institution that was supposed to prevent exactly this kind of catastrophe has been neutralized. Europe was supposed to be the adult in the room, and instead they're hiding under the table.
Let me bring in the Hong Kong story, because I know people are wondering why we're covering a building fire on a war-focused show. The Wang Fuk Court fire in Hong Kong matters because it shows us what happens to ordinary people when governments prioritize control over care. Authorities are telling residents to brace themselves for the conditions in their own homes. They're distributing psychological assessment questionnaires to help people decide if they're mentally fit to see what's left of their apartments. That is the sound of a government managing trauma, not preventing it.
And the connection to our war coverage is this: governments around the world are becoming experts at managing the aftermath of catastrophes they failed to prevent, or in some cases caused. In Gaza, they manage humanitarian corridors that lead nowhere. In Europe, they manage public opinion while doing nothing. In Hong Kong, they manage the psychological fallout of infrastructure failures. The common thread is a governing philosophy that treats citizens as problems to be processed rather than people to be protected.
Back to the strikes on Gulf Aluminum, Alex, because the economic implications haven't been fully appreciated yet. Aluminum prices were already elevated before these strikes. Now you're looking at potential supply disruptions from two of the world's largest producers simultaneously. Every aerospace company, every car manufacturer, every construction firm that sources Gulf aluminum is recalculating right now. And with Hormuz closed, energy prices are going to spike. We're looking at a potential stagflation scenario driven entirely by a war that most of the world didn't want.
And who benefits from that? Follow the money. American energy companies benefit enormously from Hormuz disruptions because it drives demand for US LNG exports. American defense contractors benefit from regional escalation because it means more weapons sales. And the geopolitical architects in Washington benefit because a destabilized Middle East keeps potential rivals, China, the EU, India, scrambling to secure energy supplies instead of challenging American hegemony. This war is not an accident. It is a business model.
The Al Jazeera piece frames this as a war on humanity, and I want to sit with that phrase. What we've documented in Gaza over the past 2 years, the destruction of hospitals, the targeting of journalists, the starvation of children, the erasure of universities and cultural institutions, this is not collateral damage. It is systematic. And now that systematic destruction is being exported. The strikes on Iran, the closure of Hormuz, the economic warfare against Gulf states, it all flows from the same logic. If you can destroy Gaza with impunity, why would you stop there?
Let's talk about what the Palm Sunday blockade reveals about Israel's long-term strategy. For years, analysts have warned about the creeping annexation of East Jerusalem. The restrictions on Muslim worshippers at Al-Aqsa have been well documented. But blocking Christian leaders from the Holy Sepulchre crosses a different line. It tells us that Israel's endgame is not coexistence with any other religious or ethnic community. It is total sovereignty, unshared and unchecked. And they're testing how far they can push before the international community reacts.
The answer, based on all available evidence, is that they can push as far as they want. The international community has been tested and found wanting at every single threshold. Chemical weapons in Syria, no consequence. Annexation of Crimea, sanctions that Russia absorbed. Genocide in Gaza, vetoes at the Security Council. Blocking Catholic clergy from their holiest church, silence. Each failure to respond raises the bar for what's considered acceptable. We are in a world where norms don't just erode, they evaporate.
And Europe's paralysis makes this worse, not just for the Middle East, but for the entire rules-based international order that Europe claims to champion. The South China Morning Post analysis is devastating on this point. Europe isn't just failing to act, it's demonstrating to every authoritarian government on earth that the West's commitment to international law is conditional and transactional. If you're a useful ally, you can do whatever you want. If you're not, you get sanctioned and lectured. That's not a rules-based order. That's a power-based order with good marketing.
I want to address the people watching tonight who feel overwhelmed by all of this, because I know it's heavy. The connection between a blocked Palm Sunday Mass in Jerusalem, aluminum smelters burning in Bahrain, Hormuz closing, Europe frozen in place, and the ongoing genocide in Gaza, the connection is impunity. Every one of these events is enabled by the same structural failure. The most powerful nations on earth have decided that international law applies to their enemies and not to themselves. That is the root problem underneath every story we've covered tonight.
And let's be honest about the media's role in maintaining that impunity. How many American networks led with the Palm Sunday story today? How many gave the Bahrain aluminum strikes more than 30 seconds? How many connected the European paralysis to U.S. energy leverage? The corporate media ecosystem is designed to present these as isolated events, a skirmish here, a diplomatic tension there, an unfortunate incident somewhere else. Our job at Truth Report is to show you the architecture that connects them all.
The architecture is American hegemony enforced through military power, energy dependency, and financial control. Israel operates as a regional enforcer with a blank check. Gulf states are kept in line through defense agreements that double as hostage situations. Europe is neutralized through energy dependency. And the Global South watches, takes notes, and draws the obvious conclusion: the West does not believe its own rhetoric about human rights and international law. That conclusion will shape geopolitics for the next 50 years.
Now let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz specifically, because its closure is not just an energy story, it's a food story, a medicine story, a global logistics story. Roughly a fifth of the world's petroleum transits through that choke point. But it's not just oil. It's liquefied natural gas, petrochemicals, fertilizer inputs. When Hormuz closes, food prices rise globally because fertilizer gets more expensive. Developing nations that were already struggling with food insecurity are going to be pushed to the brink. This war will kill people who never heard a bomb.
And that's the true scope of the war on humanity that Al Jazeera is describing. It's not limited to the people under direct bombardment in Gaza or Iran. It radiates outward through economic systems, supply chains, and energy markets. A family in sub-Saharan Africa that can't afford bread because fertilizer prices doubled, they're casualties of this war too. A factory worker in Southeast Asia laid off because aluminum supply was disrupted, casualty. A European pensioner who can't heat their home because gas prices spiked, casualty. The blast radius of this conflict is global.
The Wang Fuk Court story in Hong Kong gives us a microcosm of this dynamic. When infrastructure fails and governments respond with psychological questionnaires instead of structural solutions, you're seeing the template for how authorities worldwide will manage the cascading crises created by this war. They won't fix the systems that cause harm. They'll help you process your feelings about being harmed. That's not governance. That's therapy as a substitute for accountability.
Let me circle back to the European darkest hour framing, because it's historically loaded and deliberately so. The original darkest hour was when Britain stood alone against fascism. The implication of this analysis is that Europe today faces a moral test of similar magnitude, and is failing it. The difference is that in 1940, the threat was external. Today, the threat is coming from Europe's closest ally. And Europe cannot bring itself to name that reality because the economic consequences of honesty are too frightening.
That cowardice has a body count. Every day that Europe fails to use its considerable economic and diplomatic leverage to push for a ceasefire, more people die. Europe is not a powerless bystander, it's the world's largest single market, a nuclear-armed continent, home to major financial centers. It has tools. It chooses not to use them. And history will judge that choice with the same severity it judges every other moment when powerful nations chose comfort over conscience.
And I want to name something else that's not being discussed. The Palm Sunday blockade, the strikes on Gulf states, the Hormuz closure, all of this is happening while the global media is distracted by the US news cycle. Every outrageous statement, every domestic political circus, every manufactured controversy serves as cover for the expansion of this war. Attention is a finite resource, and it is being deliberately consumed by noise so that the signal, the systematic destruction of international order, goes undetected.
So where does this leave us? We have a regional war expanding in real time. We have the world's most important shipping lane closed. We have Europe paralyzed by dependency. We have the Vatican locked out of its own church. We have aluminum smelters burning in the Gulf. And we have a genocide in Gaza that has now become the template for how powerful states deal with populations they consider inconvenient. This is not a crisis. This is a new world order being built in real time, and most people don't even know it's happening.
That's exactly right, Alex. And here's our call to action, because we never leave you without one. First, educate yourself beyond the headlines. Read Middle East Eye, read the South China Morning Post, read Al Jazeera, read independent journalists on the ground. The information is available, but you have to seek it out because it will not be delivered to you by networks that depend on defense contractor advertising revenue.
Second, demand that your elected representatives take a position. Not a vague statement of concern. A position. Are they for or against the closure of Hormuz? Are they for or against blocking religious leaders from their holy sites? Are they for or against the use of American weapons in strikes that violate international law? Make them answer. Pin them down. Record their responses. Hold them accountable in November and every election after that.
Third, support independent media. Truth Report exists because people like you share these episodes, subscribe, and refuse to accept the sanitized version of events. Every time you share this with someone who's only getting their news from corporate outlets, you're breaking through the information blockade that keeps this system running. The most radical thing you can do right now is help someone else see the full picture.
For Truth Report, I'm Alex Truth. The war is expanding. The institutions are failing. The only thing that hasn't failed yet is the ability of ordinary people to demand better. Use it before they find a way to take that from you too.
I'm Maya Clarity. Stay informed. Stay angry. Stay human. We'll see you next time.